Chapter 25, the digestive system. So the digestive system is the digestive tract and the accessory organs. So the digestive tract, just think of it as this tube, muscular tube from your mouth all the way down, esophagus, stomach, small, large intestine, rectum, anus, out the body. And the accessory organs, as we'll see, are things like your teeth, liver, pancreas, and some other associated structures. So the primary purpose for our digestive tract is to break down the food that we ingest, put into our bodies, both mechanically, like teeth chewing, and enzymatically, our enzymes that break down food molecules to the small monomer size so you can absorb them across the epithelial lining of the small intestine into the bloodstream and absorbing the nutrients. And then your bloodstream takes care of distributing nutrients to your cells and tissues. So that's why we shove food in our face, is we're trying to harness the chemical energy in food nutrients so that our cells can do things like cellular respiration and breaking down food substances like blood sugar, glucose, to produce ATP energy to fuel our cells and our tissues and our organs and our entire body. So the organs, both the digestive system organs and the accessory organs, function to ingest. Where's my cursor? That means put food in your mouth. Digest physically and chemically. Transport nutrients and expel wastes throughout the elaborate tube that is our digestive tract. So the digestive tract is also called the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, also the alimentary canal. The organs are the mouth, pharynx or throat, esophagus. Next is the stomach, small intestine, and that transitions into the large intestine. Accessory organs, the teeth, tongue, salivary glands, the three sets that we have, liver, gallbladder, and then the pancreas. So food, once you chew it up, it's considered a bolus, and that's what leaves the mouth, and it goes down into the esophagus and drops into the stomach, where further digestion occurs. What leaves the stomach is a nice, watery, soupy material, kind of like the consistency of a smoothie, and that's called chyme. And that enters into the small intestine, where further digestion occurs. Actually, the bulk of the digestion occurs in the small intestine, and the absorption of nutrients occurring in the small intestine. And then from there into the large intestine, its function is to basically absorb water, some nutrients, compact the chyme and produce, convert it into fecal material, feces, and then that's what's eliminated from the body. Yes, get in my belly. Okay, so continuing with the functions. Ingestion, that is the intake of food. Mechanical processing, the mechanical breakdown of food, like that's what your teeth do, chew up food into smaller and smaller pieces so that you can swallow a nice sticky paste, well, a pasty bolus down the esophagus. The stomach also is a churning muscular organ, and it also does mechanical processing or breakdown of food. Chemical digestion of food is with enzymatic chemicals, proteins that break down our food into the small monomers. So for example, proteins that you ingest get chemically digested down to amino acids, for example, or fats get broken down into fatty acid chains and glycerol. So secretion happens with the salivary glands. They secrete digestive enzymes. Mucus also is secreted along the digestive alimentary canal, the mouth, esophagus. They help smooth the lining of the alimentary canal so that the food will slip down easily down into the stomach. Pancreas also produces enzymes that get squirted into the small intestine. Liver produces bile that's stored in the gallbladder, and then that gets also added into the small intestine to help break down lipids. And then absorption, uptake of nutrients, primarily the small intestine does that. There's a little bit in the stomach and some in the large intestine, but the small intestine is specially designed for absorption of nutrients. And then excretion is the elimination of waste materials and undigested food. So some excretion, elimination of wastes happens in the small, large intestine, but most of what is released, the fecal material, the feces, is undigested foodstuffs, things that we either just didn't get to digest properly, or things that we cannot digest enzymatically, like fiber, certain plant materials that we cannot digest because we don't produce the digestive enzymes for them, and that just goes out undigested. And then compaction, again, function of the large intestine to absorb water, retaining water, and that converts the liquidy chyme into a more solid fecal material, feces, and then that's what we eliminate into the environment. So let's look at the organization of the digestive tract. So in general, there are 4 layers or tunics. Here's a cross-section of the digestive tract. Here's a diagram of a generalized digestive tract. And let's consider the layers or tunics from inside, inner, to the outer wall. So this opening, this lumen, is where food would be moving through, and it's lined by the first layer, the mucosa, or the mucosal layer. Notice it's all very convoluted. Its epithelium is, for the most part, simple columnar, with some modifications along the digestive tract. It has an underlying connective tissue called the lamina propria, which is not labeled here, but we'll see it in a bit. Oh, here we go. So there's a zoomed in convoluted mucosal layer, and just deep to it is the lamina propria, which is it labeled? Here we go, lamina propria, right? Connective tissue layer. Then next is the submucosa, which is loose connective tissue, here in blue-gray, right? Below the mucosal layer, submucosa. And then the muscular layer has 2 layers of smooth muscle, except for the stomach that has a third. We'll get to that when we get to the stomach. The inner layer is a circular layer, meaning it goes in this orientation, like so, circular layer, meaning the cell fibers, the smooth muscle cell fibers, are oriented in a circular fashion around the digestive tube. And then the outermost layer is the longitudinal layer of smooth muscle, and those fibers run along the long axis of the digestive tube. All right? So 2 layers, and the orientation of the muscle fibers are perpendicular to each other. The inner layer is a circular layer, the outer layer, longitudinal layer. So in this cross-section that you see here, that's why the orientation and the appearance of the muscle fibers looks different. Here it looks like little hexagons in a way. That's because of that orientation, the circular layer. So this would be a big circular layer around the mucosa, the inner layer, and then the outer layer is the longitudinal layer. Notice that the muscle fibers are going in the same direction as the lumen, the space of the digestive tube, longitudinal layer. Okay. Oh, jumping ahead of myself, okay? All right, and then the outermost layer is the serosa, or Adventitia, depending on where the digestive tube is in the body. For our purposes, we can simply call it the serosa or the Adventitia. Either term are fine for us. Technically, the serosa is that serous membrane within the peritoneal cavity, in the abdominal pelvic cavity. And then the Adventitia, it's a fibrous sheath that helps hold the digestive tube in place elsewhere in the body. So for example, the esophagus would be covered with the Adventitia, but the small and large intestine for the most part are covered by the serosa. Okay? We can use these terms interchangeably. I won't ask you to distinguish between the two. Excuse me, so there you go. There would be the, in pink here, the serosa or Adventitia. All right. So let's look at how the muscular layers are involved in movement of materials through the digestive tube or tract. So the muscular layer, smooth muscle, contracts obviously. The internal circular layer and the longitudinal layers, when they contract, the internal layer constricts the diameter of the GI tract, digestive tube, and in doing so helps push the food or bolus along. Kind of analogous to if you were squeezing a test tube, not a test tube, I'm sorry, a toothpaste tube. If you were to squeeze it here with your fingers, you would push the toothpaste in a particular direction. Okay? That's because of the contraction of the inner layer, inner circular layer of muscle. The longitudinal layer, when it contracts, it helps shorten and lengthen certain regions of the digestive tract, and in doing so, in conjunction with the contraction of the inner circular layer of the muscular layer, they help propel and push food forward. And then we'll also see another modification of this, which is referred to as segmentation. So smooth muscle contraction, the stimulus for this is stretch. So when you swallow food in you're chewing, that's under skeletal muscle contraction. That's under conscious control. When you swallow, that's also skeletal muscle at the back of your throat. Upper portion of the pharynx is lined with skeletal muscle. Your tongue is skeletal muscle. So when you chew and swallow, that's all skeletal muscles under conscious control. But once you swallow and that food starts to go down the esophagus, the smooth muscle takes over. You don't have to think about it anymore. And the contraction of the smooth muscle layers, internal circular and the external longitudinal layers, will propel the food down towards the stomach. What initiates the contraction of that smooth muscle is the stretch of the esophagus. When you swallow a bolus, it goes down. The esophagus is essentially kind of closed when you're not eating or drinking. As soon as you swallow something and the bolus enters into the esophagus, the smooth muscle gets stretched, and that initiates the stimulus for contraction of the smooth muscle, internal circular and the external longitudinal layers. And then that's what pushes the food along. Okay? There's also hormones and chemicals that are secreted by, like the stomach, that will help also increase contraction or cause contraction in the digestive tract. We'll see that when we get to the stomach. Okay? So the initial movement of food, like the analogy I talked about squeezing a tube of toothpaste, and you would propel toothpaste, or in this case food, in one direction, that's referred to as peristalsis or peristaltic motion. So when you swallow something, the food goes into the esophagus and it gets pushed down towards the stomach, that's peristalsis. And here we go. Circular and longitudinal muscles contract in sequence to help propel the food along, and peristalsis will also propel the food along throughout the digestive tract. Segmentation is a back and forth movement of the food and a churning, mixing action of the food. So it's kind of like, let's think of the analogy of a tube of toothpaste again. If you squeeze here, it'll push toothpaste one direction, and if you squeeze here, it'll push it back, and if you squeeze here, it'll push it forward and back. So kind of a sequential contraction of the smooth muscle will churn the food, break it up, and segment it through the process of segmentation. And what that does is it helps mix up the food, especially in contact with enzymes.